right, folks, today is Thursday, and this week it's going to be Bitcoin and politics. And do we have a show lined up for you all? Listen, my name is Paul McNeil. I'm the crypto curator. I curate news information every day to help you understand what's going on in the world of digital assets or crypto assets, however you want to call them. You can check out my website, cryptocurator.com. That's where you'll find all the news information, all the ways to contact me. But to get started with today's show, I have a special guest on this week. Normally it's just me, but this week I'm going to be joined by Sultan. He is part of Quantum Economics, right along with myself. And as you know, we had the big news where BitcoinLivejn has now did a strategic partnership with Quantum Economics. So this has been really exciting that we're going to start having some of the Quantum Economic representatives on some of our shows. So with that, let's go ahead and bring on Oz. And I'm going to let Oz give us a background on who he is. He's a phenomenal person. He's run for office. He's done it all. And that's why I wanted to have him on this show. So, hey, Oz, how's it going?
Hey, pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me on. My name's Sultan. I've been involved in the blockchain industry for about a decade at this point. I've worked on numerous ICOs, IDOs, IEOs. I've been interim CEO for a couple of platforms previously. And I'm currently doing chief product officer work for Parallel Worlds, as well as advising on a couple of different quantum economics startups, and our private reorganization of actually a couple different DeFi protocols, which we're going to be announcing later this year. In a public capacity, I am the Republican district leader for the 70th Assembly in New York City, which represents West Harlem. So a little bit north of 96th Street, all the way to about 135th Street, from Madison all the way to the water. So covering the Columbia area, that sort of a thing. In addition to doing that, I've worked with the state of Rhode Island on their crypto legislation since 2018. We've got 3 bills that are going to be going on the floor inside of the next cycle, which I anticipate it may be introduced this fall, but it'll probably be introduced in the spring. I've testified before numerous legislatures in terms of the legality and technicalities of crypto banking and why that needs to be brought more mainstream now, specifically with regulational changes that we've had from the OCC. And I'm a general maxi, I suppose you could say, because I personally think that this is a just geographical shift in terms of how we purview money, how we look at assets, and how we're actually going to start looking at ownership over the course of the next 100 years. So that's a bit on me, and happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, thanks for that. And I'm glad you hit on some points, because those I definitely want to get your thoughts on. I sort of have my thoughts, but it's always good to get other people's thoughts as well. So I'm going to have Nick put up the slides. Folks, today the show is going to be about the presidential candidates. And again, I've covered them before, but the reason I'm bringing them up again is because I was listening to a podcast and someone was covering the presidential candidates, and they were talking about certain candidates being pro-crypto or pro-Bitcoin. And I don't know, for me, it's not a big point, but I think that they were mischaracterizing some of these candidates, because I think some of these candidates are in fact pro-Bitcoin. They really don't talk about crypto that much, while as others might actually be pro-crypto and really don't talk about Bitcoin that much. So with that, we're going to go to our next slide, and we're going to take a look at first, and I'll talk to Oz about this. Oz, when you look at this definition, this is from Wikipedia, that Bitcoin is a protocol which implements a public, permanent, and decentralized ledger. What are some of your thoughts what's the difference between, or is there a difference between Bitcoin and a cryptocurrency?
So Bitcoin was the original proof of digital money, okay? And it was also the original proof of a ledger that came out. And, we had the whole pizza test very early on. You can buy pizza with it. We've seen the utility of it in terms of, not just becoming a store of value comparable to gold. We've seen where, large companies like BlackRock want to get into the mix. And, 3 years ago, they're like, oh, this stuff is fake. And now they're like, we'd like an ETF, please, give us the regulatory guidelines for that. And we've seen the same shift with Jamie Dimon. Jamie Dimon was like, Bitcoin bad, buy Bitcoin at discount, based upon market pressures from what he said. And so, we've gone through this interesting, I guess you'd call it like the late 1920s, early 30s inside of digital currencies, where there wasn't a lot of regulation, where there was international regulations that kind of popped up, where it's sort of a battle in between the European Union and I would say that the Tiger Nations, the ASEAN Association of States, and America, right? And you're seeing interesting things happening in Canada now too, where you can take certain crypto derivative products out on the Toronto Stock Exchange, that sort of a thing. We saw that happen with Ethereum. But to your core, the difference I think is that because Bitcoin is just the original proof of work, and because we have, somewhere around 16 different consensus mechanisms that are out there that you could use that a lot of people aren't even aware of. They just think proof of work, proof of stake. I think a lot of your cryptocurrencies differ from Bitcoin in two senses. One is that they are beyond the original proof. And two is that secondary and tertiary cryptocurrencies were oftentimes forked off of the remainder cryptocurrencies that are out there. And this is not just Ethereum. We're now seeing dozens of them that have, their own tokens that are issued off of protocol, BSD, so on and so forth. So I think that's one. And two is where we're going with NFTs. So, with cryptocurrencies, NFTs, you have standards. With Bitcoin, you have ordinals, right? Now you have ordinals with other platforms as well. But it is a vastly different way of looking at this, which incurs the encapsulation of the art as well with the ordinal on the blockchain, whereas the NFT may or may not. And the NFT also can be a variety of different other things. Like in New York City, we had a real estate company take a $26 million property and associate the deed with the smart contract, as well as the NFT. And so now you have an asset-backed derivative security that is an NFT at the same time. And that's just the tipping point where this is going inside of DeFi and CeFi and other things. So that's my initial thesis on it, is that the Bitcoin was the original sort of like OG proof. It is the OG proof of money. It is going to continue to be sort of OG in terms of how the utility of creating things like ordinals off of it exists. And it stands to potentially become an additional permutation in terms of how we perceive digital currency as we start moving into some of these new ERC standards that really are Ethereum, but they affect Bitcoin as well in terms of seedless wallets, right? Because at the end of the day, if you really look at what's mass adoption is PayPal and Cash App. That's mass adoption. And whereas, we had we had a couple of rappers like pushing Cash App, and you could get, and I got the free like Bitcoin, it was like $9 worth in order to sign up. It's that kind of a utility case of something working in between crypto and Bitcoin that's going to push for mass adoption. So it becomes an ecosystem, really, more than just the segregation of like identities that we have for these currencies.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I agree with you. I mean, it's wild to see when Bitcoin was first on the scene. It was only Bitcoin. The white paper existed, and that's all we knew. And then eventually, Litecoin comes around, and then once Ethereum came, the floodgates came open, and everything else that we have today is for the most part created. So it's interesting to see that. Nick, if you'll put up the next slide about cryptocurrencies, this is again from Wikipedia. It says cryptocurrency is a digital currency designed to work as a medium of exchange through a computer network that is not reliant on any central authority, such as a government or bank, to uphold and maintain it. And one of the things that I've been thinking about lately, Oz, is that I know we have made this whole narrative around Bitcoin, but if you go back and read the Bitcoin white paper, from what I understand, from what I read, it really is about just allowing us to be able to spend money on the internet without it going through a third party. But for some reason, we've extrapolated that out now to have Bitcoin being, this whole philosophy behind it and going against the banks and short the banks and just all this other stuff. When in fact, Satoshi white paper says, all I want to do is make it possible that you can spend money on the internet without being doxxed and that it can't be spent twice. That's it. Do you see anything more than that?
Those are still issues that we have with exchanges and trading, and that's the dual spending. I'll table for now, but I think you're correct, and I think that the complexity of this really kind of comes in when other people who are the intermediaries want to insert themselves into the conversation. It is distinctly for that. It is for intermediary less purchasing. I want to buy a widget from you. You tell me widget is X price. I go, that's fantastic. It's 0.1 Bitcoin. I transfer you 0.1 Bitcoin. You either transfer me the good or it's held in escrow. Escrow releases, it gives me the good. We are done. Okay, that's basically it. What has challenged the perception of this, I think, is one, centralized and decentralized exchanges, and how they are actually utilizing things and their own double spend issues that still come up in trading, especially with certain trading pairs and certain exchanges. But number two is the intermediary issue, is that for the bulk of time, with the exception of, I would say third world, developing nations, second world countries, however you want to use them, and don't yell at me for the terminology. It's stuff I grew up with as well. For these, without the exception of those economies, everyone kind of keeps their money in an intermediary, the intermediary being a bank, a credit union, something along those lines. And when the OCC came out in 2018 and said, okay, banks can custody crypto, you basically only had your digital platforms that were trading platforms kind of there at that point in time, saying that we've got soft wallets, we can custody your crypto, we could do other things. They were also the only ones that were kind of insured in order to say that, like, yes, we are custodying your crypto. If we get hacked, you're okay. The problem with the banks is that they don't really have those two things fully in place, with the exception of their high net worth clients. Citibank does it, Chase does it. I think Wells does it, but these are all for ultra high net worth clients. For the average person, would you really trust Wells Fargo, that can't get your Zelle payments correct half the time, to custody your crypto and then allow you access to it? And that becomes the largesse of, like, where I think we get these weird conversations in the middle, because until we see a full dissolution of the intermediaries, you're never going to have, like, the original argument really sort of validated. And we are seeing a dissolution of those intermediaries, specifically starting with Silicon Valley Bank.
Yep. And again, this is what's going to make the conversation very interesting as we look at these presidential candidates, because, again, as I said, I've listened to some of the podcasts, and so let me just look at these candidates for right now. So as we look right now in the 2024 race, we've got a whole slew of Republican candidates. We've got former President Donald Trump, Nikki Haley, Vivek Ramaswamy, Perry Johnson, Larry Elder, Asa Hutch, Tim Scott, Ron DeSantis, Mayor Francis. I'm sure many, many more will join this circus.
Yep.
As you look at this, I have some succeeding slides. One, looking at Donald Trump. Now, I don't know how much you know, and I'm sure you know a lot about Donald Trump and his stance when it comes to Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. But in the past, Donald Trump has said that he's not a fan of Bitcoin, and he's called it a scam against the dollar. And he says the cryptocurrencies are a disaster waiting to happen. So if Trump was to get reelected, what do you think our environment's going to be? And do you think that he would be a good person in office when it comes to just Bitcoin? And I know it's a one-topic issue, but just Bitcoin.
When it comes to just Bitcoin, I think that there's changes from just what we're seeing in sort of the press narrative with him that would open the door to, I think, more Bitcoin proliferation. One is the fact that he launched his own NFTs. Two is the fact that he's still keeping an eye on the Trump token, which is out there. And there's a Trump token that refers to Donald Trump, and it's trading. But three is the fact that, you're seeing an adoption by your large scale financial systems of this and other alternative means of payment, alternative currencies that are out there. And I think from, I worked on his Syria policy, which was for Syrian safe zones, which is, being an American Muslim, I mean, it's a big concern of mine, because every single time we have an election, more of my people die in cannon fodder, right?
Hmm.
So it is always a concern. So just from, having talked with some of his policy people, I think that there's an opportunity for new financial policy that would incorporate this. However, the people that he is probably going to bring in, like, um, one of a lot of his former folks that were in finance, really at the Fed, are now at the World Bank and a bunch of other places, and I don't know if they get recalled. But there's I think an interesting perspective, at least from the Trump camp, that one, it could become a future commerce source to really drive the economy, and two is that it could help with the unbanked. And this is in conversations that I've had with certain pastors around that campaign and a few other folks, because like even Pastor Daryl Scott, he's looking at like, what can we do at getting into the unbanked, the disenfranchised. A lot of people don't like even consider Harlem, where I am, but we have 27 to 32% unbanked of the entire
Mm-hmm.
population that's here. And we're talking about
Mm-hmm.
people that still work MTA jobs and go to the check cashing place because they don't trust the banks, or that they've had bad experiences being minorities with the banks. So there's a lot of utility there, and I think that's really where his policy would come from. But in the
Gotcha.
international stage, I think it's anyone's game, because he's the type of guy that's always going to play regulatory challenges with the European Union and a variety of other powers that are out there, and they themselves, even Russia, is moving into the forefront of digital acceptance, largely because they have a need for cash.
Yep, yep. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because when you look at these presidential candidates, and I know in the world of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, we are definitely wanting someone who's going to champion that cause for us in the White House. I think that would be phenomenal. And there's a lot of them there. And as we talk about the rest of these candidates, we're going to find that. Vivek Ramaswamy, which is almost on par with Trump. Listen, Trump
Mhm.
said that Bitcoin is a scam against the dollar. If people paid attention to Vivek's presentation at Bitcoin 2023, he was all about dollar dominance. He wants the dollar to remain dominant. But that goes sort of against all the Bitcoin people that want Bitcoin to be there. How do you see this playing out? Do you think having a candidate like a Vivek Ramaswamy, someone who is advocating for a strong dollar, but he does like Bitcoin, he's accepting it for his campaign, but he's definitely a dollar guy?
So Vivek's perspective on that needs to be tempered with understanding of what's going on with the BRICS nations. So the BRICS, BRICS, all caps, nations have basically formed a consortia that includes a number of Arab countries, a number of Latin American countries, a number of Asian countries, whereby they're talking about propping up another currency and gold backing it. So if we look at the American dollar as the hallmark of the gold standard for trade across the world, the last thing that we want is the yuan in there, which is getting in there because of the Russia-Ukraine war, and the fact that like we've suspended trading with rubles on most platforms. The BRICS are getting themselves in there with an alternative currency perspective that they could be utilizing, and what that does is that leads to trade deficits, that leads to less economic power, that leads to less economic might that the United States has. So I think that's where that starts. Now going into this, I think Vivek is largely crypto positive. I wouldn't call him a maxi by any means, but what I would say is that he's the type of guy, from what he said and what he's done. And mind you, it's not that he's accepting crypto. All of these campaigns were allowed to accept crypto starting in 2018. It's a matter of fashion of like, do they actually have the infrastructure in place to process this into dollars to do what they want to do and to file appropriately? And a lot of these campaigns are behind the eight ball in terms of technology.
Mhm.
But I think a Ramaswamy presidency, and he's the third candidate right now behind DeSantis. He's coming up. Could have some very positive outcomes for not just Bitcoin, but for the legitimacy of cryptocurrencies and really the banking establishment moving in
Mhm.
and being able to utilize these with it increased legislation, and increased enforcement through the OCC and the SEC. But that's also like another thing that we're dealing with all these candidates, right? You got the SEC, you got the FTC, you got FINRA, you got FinCEN, you got the OCC, then you have the Treasury. Okay, And half the time when you talk about policy, it's like a ping pong battle between these guys. It's like, no, it's your problem. It's your problem over there. And they don't really speak to like, well, technically, jurisdictionally, this lives here and that lives here. And so I think that that could be useful. And I think personally right now, in terms of Bitcoin, I think Trump number one, Vivek number two.
Yeah, the CFTC and the SEC, they're fighting for who's going to have dominance over cryptocurrencies. But you're right. I think that what you just said about being number one, number two, brings up the next candidate, which is DeSantis. Right? When you look at DeSantis, I think people sort of underestimate DeSantis when it comes to Bitcoin. If you look at this, the dude is definitely probably one of the most bullish people on Bitcoin. And this is the reason why. First, he said that we will accept Bitcoin for state taxes. Now, granted, this is not on the consumer side, but this is on the business side. But that is a huge statement. He then goes on and makes Florida the largest state to require Bitcoin and financial literacy to graduate. That is huge. And I haven't seen this from anybody else in the entire country. And then you look at him, he is definitely made Bitcoin a pillar of his campaign. And he is one of the most pro-Bitcoin candidates that we have out there. And then he talked about protecting Bitcoin, which I said Bitcoin doesn't need protection. But Ron DeSantis is going to be a force to be reckoned with in this race. And, it'll be interesting to see where he really does fall out between the other two candidates.
I think he's gotten a lot of his education from Mayor Suarez of Miami. I mean, Mayor Suarez is probably the biggest Bitcoin maxi we have in the country right now.
Yep.
And I would say this puts DeSantis above Trump. So now we're talking DeSantis, Trump, and Vivek sort of underneath him. I think the education pieces that could come from this would be huge. I think his push to kind of upgrade the Department of Education, which someone needs to do. And it's not about what everyone's talking about right now, which is gender and culture. It is the brass tacks. Do the kids that we're graduating right now understand the new economic arena that they are walking into? Do they understand the change in assets? And for the love of God, can they balance a spreadsheet? Because these are like some basic things that really need to come out. But I think DeSantis would be strong in that. I think he would also be strong in terms of some sort of standardization of policy, because if he thinks that his state can take it, and we know that Nevada has passed legislation by which you can pay state taxes there as well, and there's other states that are coming online behind that, I think that there could be a huge boon, a huge value proposition here. I think it is still going to come back to a legal ruling that needs to be educated as of yet, which hasn't come to pass. But between the states and the Fed and even I would say certain district attorneys in different jurisdictions across the United States, we still have this big problem of, is it a currency? Is it a commodity? Okay. And for all intents and purposes right now, it's being treated as a currency. But the challenge that we have with many other cryptos is that they're being treated as a commodity. And if we look at what's coming from, and if you go to my LinkedIn and you can just crawl through, because I post a lot of these things, and it's the legislation, right? And we look at what different regulatory bodies are saying in the US, what different regulatory bodies are saying in Europe, and we consider the fact that they're still one of our biggest trading partners for a variety of things. You start looking at like interesting use cases that are popping up, and like how this is going to affect the taxation of this and the spending of this. And I'll throw one last wild card in, and this is no one thinks of IBM as a big lobbying group, but IBM has been in Washington since the Obama administration, pushing their Hyperledger stack as the de facto sort of like, let's consider this the blockchain stack. And I sit on the Council Exchange Board of Trade, which is talking to the Office of the Comptroller of Currency, as well as the Office of Management and Budget. And so what do these letters mean, Oz? The White House sitting here operates OMB. OMB operates everyone's budget across the the entirety of the United States government, as well as budgets that are then cascaded down to states in terms of subsidies and allocations and spend, and has or should have, some sort of an audit capacity inside of there. Hyperledger's been positioning themselves very strongly to do that, and the United States is going to make a decision by 2026 on like what a federal blockchain will look like. So there's some concern there. I think dishonest could be useful in terms of deferring us against, a large corporate blockchain, which I don't think anyone in our industry wants, but also potentially looking at an agnostic solution in terms of a backplane. And I've started calling them backplanes because it's not necessarily layer 0, 1, or 2. It's the fact that like we need to be able to interconnect and document transactions across these blockchains if you're going to have some sort of a fruitful future vision of commerce inside of this country that ties into a financial backplane such as that. And right now, a lot of these things don't exist. So that's where I think dishonest would sit.
Awesome. Yeah, the next person is Tim Scott, and he really doesn't have much to say. I mean, he hasn't really co-sponsored any legislation, but he said he's going to map out his priorities for crypto regulation structure. But the next person is Mayor Francis Suarez, and as you said, probably the biggest of all. He accepted his entire salary in Bitcoin. He's been very friendly to Bitcoin. That's where they've had the Bitcoin conference for the past 3 years. This next year is going to be in Nashville. But, as he jumps into this race, it will be interesting to seeing the fact that his governor is also running for president, who's going to really win this battle between him and DeSantis, both being strong advocates of Bitcoin. How do you think that's going to shake out there in Florida?
I think Suarez needs a lot more name recognition for him to be really kind of a contender. I mean, at this point, he's like a 4th, 5th pick, maybe a 6th pick. Kind of coming into this, I would say of all of these, Suarez is probably the biggest maxi that we have out there. He would be for, the standardization of legislation. He'd be for the definition of it as a currency, not a commodity. I think he would also help with the definition of additional cryptocurrencies, in buckets. And I don't think that they're all going to end up as currencies. I think some will be currencies, some will be commodities. Some you'll end up with a bunch of red flags like our Monero derivatives that happened from, the fork and then the spoon being that they were giving a token out with it. I didn't come up with these terms. But that being like a 2018, 2019 type thing. But the question the government is always going to have inside of these things is, one of privacy and spending, specifically when it deals with nefarious things. And when they themselves aren't able to control, what the nefarious spend is on black money, which is, American dollars that are used for everything from slave trade to arms dealing to whatnot.
Yep, definitely. Well, hey, let's take a second and let's give our sponsor a little bit of shout out here. I have my little spiel that I have to do for Roundly X, but like I always like to tell people, when you look at Roundly X, the first thing you have to wonder is, hey, is it faster than a mining rig? Is it more powerful than a piggy bank, able to compound your savings in a single click? It's a Bored Ape. It's a big butt. No, it's Roundly X. Hey, folks, listen, if you go to roundlyx.com, you can start stacking sats with your spare change. And you can even do routine automated purchases of Bitcoin because they partner with the best exchanges. You can get $15 in Bitcoin when you use the code Bitcoin Politics. All right, let's get back to our show. Listen, as we looked at the Republican side, and a lot of people in crypto like to say, guess what? Republicans are pro Bitcoin and Democrats are against Bitcoin. But with this next set of candidates, and it really is only one to be honest, because if you look at Joe Biden, Marianne Williamson, and Robert F. Kennedy, there's really only one that really supports Bitcoin. But looking at Joe Biden, first of all, we know that Joe has been against Bitcoin, against cryptocurrencies. What's really being said is that his policies are definitely not Bitcoin friendly. So, Oz, do you have any take on Joe Biden's position on Bitcoin?
So it's interesting to see what's happening under the Biden administration. The SEC is going to have some sort of disposition in October that's going to deal with crypto and AI and bots and trading and disclosures and money management. Okay, all of those things are going to be somehow addressed or partially addressed. Right now, you're seeing just more of a a cloudy field under the Biden administration. They keep talking about wanting to and pushing forward crypto legislation. The legislation seems to be a paper tiger. It doesn't have any strength to it. At the same point in time, we see what's coming out of Europe, and there's strong crypto legislation. There's a strong move towards a digital pound. There's strong moves towards AI regulation in relation to this for automated trading and money market management for people. So I don't see, if Biden were to be reelected, I just don't think that we'd really be getting much policy. And I think a lot of this would be handed to Yellen and, a Gensler and a variety of people that we're just quizzical as to like the real effectiveness, both with fiscal policy and with crypto policy. And I just think it would go nowhere.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And that's what people have to look at is, again, the policies that are being created, are they really going to help advance this digital asset, or are they going to hold it back?
Mhm.
That being said, as we look at the person that probably is just shocking the world right now when it comes to Bitcoin is Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Listen, he praises Bitcoin. He says CBDCs are an instrument of control. He has been pounding the drum about what Bitcoin can actually do. He, of all the people that I've talked about, to be honest, in my viewpoint, is the only person that is pro Bitcoinism. I haven't heard RFK talk about Ethereum or Solana or nothing. He's talked about
Mhm.
Bitcoin, Bitcoin, Bitcoin only. And so it'll be interesting, again, getting your take on his views on Bitcoin and what you think, how he stands when it comes to Bitcoin.
I think RFK is very strong on Bitcoin. I think he sees this as a new utility space by which we could expand economic influence and American influence across the globe, specifically by allowing this inside of certain things like trade settlements. Like for example, what a lot of people aren't aware of is Venezuela and a couple of their neighbors, because the Venezuelan currency has about an effective 100% inflation. And you can't say that like, oh, I give you a bill for $1 today, it's $2 tomorrow, right? In their currency.
Mm-hmm.
So they've
Mm-hmm.
been settling their foreign direct investment payments for trade in Bitcoin for like years. Okay. And I think that Kennedy would look at things similar to that to say, whether it's some of our trade partners or our emerging market partners, that we may be able to utilize cryptocurrency in a more meaningful fashion. And I think if you look at what's going on in Africa right now, specifically with the Central African republics and their rebuke of France, and people finally talking about the fact that like decades after the independence of Algeria, all these African nations are still entitled to put their gold into French banks. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that a move towards a stabilization of some sort of crypto regime, whether that's a CBDC or something else, could be useful. But at the same point in time, what Kennedy has pointed out is the danger of CBDCs. Okay, whereas the digital pound is more likely to be a go by 2028, and you'll have Brits walking around with phones and saying, "Hey, I'm paying with my digital pound connected to my Apple Pay." The thing I think a lot of people are worried about is that if they do something wrong in the social credit construct of the Chinese, where they can turn your bank off in China, and they do,
Yep.
and where they have told people that you are no longer a holder of your account in the bank, that you're an investor in China, meaning that they've effectively quasi-nationalized everyone's currency. That's the worry with CBDCs, is that like you do something wrong, you violate a law, something happens, they pass a law that basically says they could turn your money off. And I think that's what RFK Jr. has pointed out. I think that's a big concern for maxis across the world. And it's also
Mm-hmm.
a bigger concern with the creators of the CBDCs, because in many cases, they're bringing in developers and cybersecurity people that are a little bit behind the curve of our industry, because we are
Mm-hmm.
predominantly bleeding edge. And we fix things as fast as we can, and we see bug bounties and a variety of things like that. But I just don't see that coming with a CBDC. I don't see that
Right.
ethos and that sensibility there. And
Mm-hmm.
I think RFK, should he get anywhere near the nomination, we're not going to see this until the primary cycle, with Iowa in January being our first primary.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, if he can get some votes away from Biden, this is going to be real interesting, specifically since the DNC has said that they don't want to debate between their candidates, which is a little fascist, if you asked me.
Very.
But yeah, it is what it is.
Yeah. Well, let's throw up that last slide because this one is going to be phenomenal. I went back through and I listened to RFK's speech at Bitcoin 2023. And you have to say again how powerful this guy is. 6 points that he spelled out. He would defend self-custody, which is huge and it's odd to see a presidential candidate talk like this because basically he's disallowing the government to have control over you, which we know that the government wants control. But he says defend self-custody, uphold the right to run a node at your home, defense use of neutral and industry neutral energy regulation. He wants the U.S. to remain the global hub of Bitcoin. And again, the terms he uses are so important because he could have easily said cryptocurrency, but he says the hub of Bitcoin, and that Bitcoin is not a security, but its regulation is needed. And then the bombshell of all is that he said that he would be opening to pardoning Ross Ulbricht, which everyone
Trump was entertaining pardoning Ross. That there was some back channel discussions that were going on there, but I think RFK is serious about it.
I think he is. And I hope that gets more airplay because the guy, listen, I think he served his time. Did he do some bad stuff? Of course. But should he be in there for the rest of his life? Absolutely not. Someone needs to get this guy out of jail and needs to get him out fast because it's unfortunate for them to lock somebody up like Ross for doing what he did. It's ridiculous. So
it's, the synthetic murder issue aside inside of there. I mean, there's questions about how it was done. There's questions about like where the Bitcoin went, and how that was sold. I mean, there's a lot of questions about that prosecution and how Ross might have been railroaded. So I think, that it is about fair time that was reevaluated. I think RFK would be a great candidate to do that, but he's got a very hard uphill battle until he gets to a point where he takes, he would have to take a handful of the primaries in order for him to be really considered serious. And then above and beyond that, the DNC would actually have to allow that to happen because the DNC could basically do something that would be the equivalent of jury nullification, of their of their delegates, and basically say, well, we know that he got the votes, but we're picking this guy. So that is an altogether, potential possibility were he to make it that far.
Right. Well, hey, as we end the show, I definitely want to ask you, of all of those candidates we just talked about, which one do you think has the best shot at making it to the White House in 2024?
You know what? If Trump can clear his charges, even just talking to my contemporaries in Harlem who are not Republican, who are diehard Democrats, they're thinking Trump, and a lot of this is due to the fact that we got $5.20 gas in New York City. We have food that is completely out of reach, for many of my neighbors. We have transportation prices that are increasing. We have crumbling infrastructure. We have just economic problems out the yin yang that no one wants to talk about. I think a second to him would be DeSantis. I think DeSantis could definitely make a good go of it. I like Vivek, but I just don't know if he's going to have enough name recognition nationally, and a lot of that's really what's going to carry him is a lot of the name recognition nationally. And even with the Don Lemon chat where Lemon himself got fired, there's still I'm half Indian and I'm half Arab, okay, and there's still issues with us just being accepted in certain parts of the country, and I think that's going to play into that as well. But I would say that those two would be great. On the Democratic side, I mean, if RFK could win a couple of primaries and doesn't get shafted at the DNC, then that's also a potential. But I think right now it's up for grabs. It's anyone's game, and it's for Biden to lose at this point.
Right. Yeah. No, I would agree with you. And hey, as much as what a wacky world it would be to have Trump as president again, it's definitely a potential. Like you said, until we see that he has
No,
So
I
hey,
mean, there's nothing really in terms of constitutional law that's stopping him from doing this. I mean, they would have to change something, but if none of these charges stick, he's got a good shot at winning the nomination.
Yeah, no, I agree. Well, hey, Oz, thanks for coming onto the show. I really appreciate it. Hopefully, I can get you back on again. I do Bitcoin policy every other Thursday, and because of your background, I would definitely love to have you on another show as we start getting closer to folks really campaigning more and talking more about Congress, because there's a lot of people in Congress. There's a lot of bills out there, and I'd definitely love to get your input on it.
I'd be happy to. And I just want to, I'm going to state something. Elizabeth Warren and her anti-crypto army is so out of touch with reality.
Way out of touch.
I think that, Web 1 brought the internet. Web 2 brought social media. Web 3 is going to bring decentralized payment infrastructure as well as the metaverse whenever the metaverse gets here. But that's a big game changer. We're in the middle of the fourth industrial revolution. So, the opportunity is now, and realistically, we need a presidential leader that's going to help us capture and build upon that. And, not someone that's kind of stuck in a decades old strategy.
I agree. Cool, man. Well, thanks a lot.
Excellent.
I appreciate it.
All right. Talk to you soon.
Okay. Awesome.
Bye.